He slammed the post into the frozen ground so hard the mallet cracked. Not because it needed more force. Because he needed somewhere to put the rage that had been building since 400, since the nightmare woke him again, since he stood over his daughter's bed in the dark just to make sure she was still breathing. Daniel Reeves didn't do festivals, didn't do crowds, didn't do people. But here he was, and then 30 feet away, a woman's entire world collapsed. Canvas, poles, ropes, everything she'd built down in seconds. She looked right at him. "Can I share your space?" He almost said no. Almost. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss where this goes. The alarm didn't wake Daniel Reeves. He was already awake. He'd been awake since 4:17 a.m., when the dream came back, the one with the smoke and the rooftop, and the name he couldn't stop hearing even after 8 years. He never told anyone about that dream. Not the VA counselor, not his sister, not even Pastor Glenn, who'd tried 3 times to get him into a men's group at the church on Route 9. Nobody got to see that part of him. He rose without making a sound, moved through the dark of the small canvas field tent, with the kind of stillness that wasn't peace. It was practice. He dressed in layers, cargo pants, long-sleeve thermal, worn boots he'd resoled twice because they fit exactly right, and he didn't trust anything new on his feet. He checked his watch 5:51 a.m. He had 11 minutes before the perimeter walk was supposed to begin. He used 9 of them to make coffee on the single-burner camp stove, pour it into his thermos, and review the grounds maintenance schedule he'd printed the night before and fold it into 3 equal sections. He'd highlighted the east quadrant in yellow because the terrain had 2 low drainage areas that would flood if the overnight dew was heavy. He made a note in the margin with a mechanical pencil. Check drainage at post 7 before 700. This was how Daniel Reeves lived, not in moments. In intervals, in checkpoints, in the disciplined architecture of a man who understood that structure wasn't a cage. It was the only thing standing between him and the version of himself that scared him. He was 44 years old, 12 years Navy SEAL, 2 combat deployments, 1 marriage that didn't survive the second one. 1 daughter, Rosie, 7 years old, currently staying 3 miles away at the Birchwood family cabins with his sister Carol, who had agreed to watch her for the weekend in exchange for Daniel promising to actually talk to a human being for once in your life. He hadn't promised that. He'd said maybe. The Driftwood Lantern Festival had operated in this stretch of rural Wisconsin for 11 years. Hayfields turned into campgrounds. Old logging trails turned into walking routes. Every August, families and couples and retirees drove up from Milwaukee and Chicago and Minneapolis to watch lanterns rise over the prairie at dusk, eat too much grilled corn, and pretend for 72 hours that their lives were simpler than they were. Daniel had been hired 6 weeks ago through a contract maintenance firm. Ground safety perimeter management structural support for vendor tents. The coordinator, a compact and perpetually stressed man named Greg Falwell, had shaken his hand and said, "You were a SEAL. Perfect. I don't want drama. I want someone who can handle problems before they become problems." Daniel had said yes, sir. And he had. Every morning since setup began, he walked the grounds at exactly 6:12 a.m. He documented everything. Wind damage, soft ground, improperly staked tents. He filed a report each evening. He spoke to no one more than necessary. He ate alone. He returned to his tent, read field manuals or history books for exactly 40 minutes, and was asleep by 9:45. He was not here to make friends. He was here to work, bank the paycheck, and get back to Rosie. That was the plan. The east quadrant was exactly as he'd expected: soft ground near post 7, a slow pool forming near the drainage seam. He crouched, pressed 2 fingers into the soil, calculated the absorption rate in his head. He'd need sandbags by midday, or the walking path would be compromised by evening. He made another note, folded the paper, kept walking. The vendor row was beginning to stir. A coffee cart couple arguing in low voices about extension cords. A man hauling an ice chest that was clearly too heavy for one person. A teenage girl walking a dog that was not according to the posted guidelines supposed to be in the vendor area. Daniel noted all of it, corrected none of it. Not his assignment. He came around the south bend of the trail, past the row of family camping stations that had been designated for the Outdoor Skills Clinic, a weekend educational program for beginner campers, mostly parents with young kids who'd never slept outside before. He'd seen the listing in the vendor packet, Lila Hart's Wilderness Confidence Clinic. He'd glanced at it once and moved on. Not his concern. Except now it was. Because the clinic tent, a large 12 by 20 canvas structure that had been staked last night with what Daniel had privately assessed as dangerously insufficient anchor depth, was in the process of collapsing. Not slowly. Not gracefully. The thing was going down. The front left pole had pulled free from the ground entirely. The canvas was folding in on itself like a dying lung. Ropes that should have been double-staked were pulling up clumps of sod. The center ridge was bowing. In about 90 seconds, the whole structure was going to come down on the folding tables, the gearboxes, and the 2 plastic bins full of what looked like lantern-making supplies. And standing in the middle of all of it, arms out trying physically to hold up the canvas with her own body, like she could will it upright, was a woman he hadn't seen before. She was maybe 35. Dark hair pulled back in a braid that had mostly escaped whatever was holding it. She was wearing a green fleece over a plaid shirt, and she was currently making a sound somewhere between a grunt and a scream as the ridgepole shifted again. "Come on, come on, come on." She was talking to the tent. The tent was not listening. Daniel stopped walking. Not my assignment, he thought. The pole slipped another 6 inches. He was moving before he finished the thought. He crossed the distance in 12 steps, ducked under the sagging canvas, grabbed the center ridge pole with both hands, and drove it upright with enough force that the whole structure snapped back into something resembling its intended shape. The woman yelped. "What who?" "Don't let go of that corner," Daniel said. "I'm not, left corner, the rope, hold it." She grabbed the rope. He moved to the pulled stake, pulled a hardened ground spike from the maintenance kit on his belt, and drove it in with 3 strikes from the back of his multi-tool. He didn't have a mallet. He didn't need one. He reset the front left pole, checked the angle, moved to the rear anchor, which was barely better. 2 more spikes. He crossed to the right side, found the same problem, shallow stakes, wrong angle. Someone had set these up by feel rather than method, and corrected them with the focused efficiency of a man who had once rigged communications infrastructure in total darkness under fire. It took him 4 minutes. The tent stood. He stepped back, assessed. It made a small adjustment to the ridge tension and stepped back again. "That should hold," he said. "You had your stakes at about 30 degrees. They needed to be 45. And you were using a single-point anchor on that corner. In any wind over 12 miles an hour, that's going to pull." The woman was staring at him, not with gratitude exactly, with something more like the expression of someone who had just watched an unexplained natural event and wasn't sure yet what to make of it. "I had a volunteer set those up yesterday," she said slowly. "I thought they knew what they were doing. They didn't." "Yeah, I can see that now." She looked at the tent, then at him, then at the spike kit still in his hand. "Thank you," she said. "I'm Lila Hart. This was my clinic tent. Daniel Reeves, grounds maintenance." "Right." She nodded like that explained everything. "Do you do tent instruction too, or just emergency rescue?" He almost said, "I don't do either. I'm going back to my route." But she said it with a half-smile that wasn't quite teasing and wasn't quite serious, and something about the timing of it landed wrong enough that he paused. "Just maintenance," he said. "Good timing on the maintenance." He nodded once, turned to go. "Wait." He stopped. She had one hand out, not grabbing him, just out, like a question. "My registration was in the north section," she said. "But they moved me here last night. Groundswater problem, they said. This spot is technically fine, but..." She looked at the layout around her. The clinic space was hemmed in on both sides by larger vendor tents with very little clearance. "I'm supposed to have 12 families running through here today. Beginners. Kids. I need room to demonstrate fire safety tent building navigation basics. And I have about 40 square feet of usable space." Daniel looked at the layout. She was right. It was a bad setup. "Talk to the coordinator," he said. "I did. Greg said there's nothing available." Then you work with what you have. I can't run a safety demonstration with no clearance zone. She said it flatly, not dramatically. Like a fact. Someone's going to get hurt. That landed. Because that was his language. That was the one thing that cut through the wall every single time. Not emotion, not inconvenience. Safety. He looked at his watch. He looked at the grounds layout he had memorized. He thought about the open maintenance staging area on the far side of his own assigned post, a 40 by 60 foot pad that was used for equipment storage, but was currently empty because the second supply trailer hadn't arrived yet. He thought about his schedule. He thought about his perimeter walk. He thought about the 14 reasons this was a terrible idea. My staging area is open until noon, he said, and hated himself slightly for saying it. It's on the east side, cleared, level ground. You could run your morning session there if you need space. She looked at him like she was checking whether he was serious. Can I share your space? She said. 3 words. Simple. Direct. And something about those 3 words in that particular order landed somewhere in Daniel Reeves's chest with a weight he didn't fully understand and wasn't prepared for. Until noon, he said. I need it back by noon. She nodded. Noon. Absolutely. And then quietly. Thank you, Daniel. He didn't say you're welcome. He turned around and continued his perimeter walk. He documented the drainage issue at Post 7. He noted the extension cord situation at the coffee cart. He filed his preliminary morning report. He did all of it on schedule. But the 40 by 60 foot staging area was in the back of his mind for the rest of the morning, like a stone in his boot, small and constant, and impossible to ignore. At 9 a.m., he swung back around to check on his staging area the way he always checked things quietly from a distance in assessment mode. What he found was not quiet. There were 7 children running in approximately 6 different directions. A father was trying to stake a tent, while his toddler pulled the mallet away from him. A grandmother in a lawn chair was watching something on her phone and periodically offering advice no one had asked for. 2 teenage boys were examining a compass like it was an artifact from a civilization they didn't belong to. And in the center of all of it, Lila Hart was laughing. Not performing laughter, not polite laughter, the full kind head back, like something had genuinely surprised her because one of the kids had just tried to demonstrate a bowline knot and produced something that was honestly more of a question mark than a knot, and she was celebrating it like it was the most remarkable thing she'd ever seen. That's actually a completely new knot, she was saying, still laughing. We're calling that one the Bailey knot. Nobody's done that one before. The kid, maybe 8 years old, round-faced and grinning, stood up straighter. Daniel stood at the perimeter and watched for longer than he needed to. Then he noticed the tent the father was building. It was going to fall. He walked over. He didn't announce himself. He just crouched next to the stake the father was struggling with, corrected the angle in silence, and drove it in properly. The father looked at him. Oh, hey. Thanks, man. 45 degrees, Daniel said. Every stake. 45 degrees. Got it. The father watched him. You a camper? No. Hiker? No. What are you then? Daniel stood. Maintenance. He moved to the next tent that needed help. He told himself he was just doing his job. He almost believed it. He was realigning a ridgeline on the third family's tent when he felt someone standing behind him. He didn't turn around. You don't have to do this, Lila said. I know. But you're doing it anyway. The tents are going to fall. She was quiet for a second. Then, you counted them, didn't you? Before I even came over. He finally looked at her. 4 of the 7 were improperly staked. 2 of those were critical failures within the hour. And the third, wind picks up after 10. By 10:30 it's a problem. She studied him with an expression he couldn't quite read. It wasn't gratitude this time. It was more like recognition, like she'd seen something in him that she was still deciding whether to name. Where'd you learn to do all this? She asked. Navy. SEAL. He looked at her. You read the staff directory. Greg has a very thorough festival briefing packet, she said. You were listed under emergency assets. That's accurate. She smiled. Not the laughing smile from before. Smaller, more careful. How long have you been out? 8 years. You still wake up early. It wasn't a question. He didn't know how she'd noticed. He hadn't told her anything. Yes, he said. Me too, she said quietly. For different reasons. She didn't say what the reasons were. He didn't ask. That felt correct. Noon came. He expected her to still be running the session. He expected to have to reclaim his space by force of scheduling, which was the kind of social friction he was least equipped to handle. Instead, at 11:54 a.m., he arrived to find the space completely cleared, every family gone, every piece of equipment back in its bag. The ground raked more or less, and Lila sitting on an overturned equipment crate writing in a notebook, a travel mug balanced on her knee. She looked up when she heard him. 11:54, she said. I figured I owed you 6 minutes. He looked at the space, looked at her. You didn't have to clean it. You didn't have to help with the tents. He had no response to that. It was true. She capped her pen and stood. Same time tomorrow. He thought about his schedule, his perimeter walk, his sandbag delivery, his promise to call Rosie at 7 p.m. sharp. 6 minutes, he said. You have 6 minutes banked. Don't be late. Something moved across her face, warm and quick like light through a gap in clouds. Wouldn't dream of it, she said. She picked up her notebook and her mug and walked away through the morning light. And Daniel Reeves stood in his empty staging area, alone, the way he was always alone, and tried to remember what he was supposed to do next. For the first time in 8 years, the schedule didn't come immediately. He had to check his notes. The 6 minutes Lila had banked didn't last long. By the second morning, she owed him nothing and showed up anyway at 8:47, 13 minutes early, hauling a canvas duffel over one shoulder and a thermos in each hand. She set one thermos on the equipment crate without a word and walked to the far end of the staging area to start laying out her clinic materials. Daniel looked at the thermos. He looked at her. He picked it up. It was black coffee. No sugar. Which meant she'd either guessed or she'd watched him closely enough to know. He wasn't sure which of those things bothered him more. He drank it, said nothing, went back to his morning check. The families started arriving at 9. More of them this time 11 up from 7, because word had moved through the campground the way word always moves through small places, quietly and faster than anyone planned. A mother named Bev had told 2 other mothers. A grandfather named Walt had mentioned it at the coffee cart. By 9:10, there were kids sitting cross-legged on the ground in a loose semicircle, and Lila was standing in front of them, holding a length of paracord, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Okay, she said. Who here thinks they already know how to tie a knot? 6 hands went up. Great, she smiled. You're all wrong. The kids laughed. The parents looked uncertain. And Daniel, from his position at the perimeter where he was absolutely just checking the drainage situation and not watching any of this, felt something move across his face that he shut down before it finished arriving. He turned back to his clipboard. He made a note about the drainage. He did not look up again for 4 minutes. The problem arrived at 10:23 a.m., and it arrived in a white polo shirt. Daniel clocked him from 50 yards. The kind of read that was automatic by now, baked into him from years of assessing rooms, crowds, and sightlines before he'd even consciously registered what he was doing. Male. Mid-50s. Good shoes in bad terrain, which meant he didn't come here to hike. Confident walk, the kind that expected clearance. Carrying a tablet and a branded water bottle with a company logo Daniel didn't recognize. He watched the man walk directly toward Lila's session without slowing down. Dr. Hart. Not a greeting. An announcement. Lila looked up from where she was crouching next to a 10-year-old, helping him work through a clove hitch. Her expression shifted, not dramatically, but Daniel caught it. Something tightened behind her eyes. Victor, she said. She stood. I didn't know you were coming out today. I come out every day. Victor Donovan smiled the smile of a man who'd practiced it in a mirror. That's the job. He looked around the staging area, at the families, the kids, the mismatched gear, the handwritten instruction cards Lila had taped to the equipment crates. "This is informal." "It's a beginner clinic," Lila said. "Informal is kind of the point." He tapped something on his tablet. "The point, according to your program agreement, is to showcase Apex Outdoors' product line in a structured educational format. I'm not seeing a lot of structure, and I'm definitely not seeing the Apex banner that was supposed to go up yesterday. The banner is in my car. I've been a little busy actually running the clinic that's currently operating in a maintenance zone." He looked around again, this time with an edge that hadn't been there before. "This isn't your designated space, Lila." "My designated space collapsed. Daniel helped me relocate." Donovan's eyes moved to Daniel for the first time. He assessed him the way people like Donovan assessed people like Daniel quickly, with the assumption that they already understood what they were looking at. He was wrong about that, but he didn't know it yet. "Maintenance," Donovan said. It came out the way some people said just before a job title. Daniel met his eyes, said nothing, held it long enough that Donovan looked away first. "The point," Donovan continued back to Lila, "is that we have a contractual structure here, and your program needs to fit within it. I've already talked to Greg about reassigning your afternoon slot. There's a vendor demonstration space opening up at 2 o'clock, proper setup signage, the whole thing. Much more visible, much more on-brand." Lila's voice stayed even. "My afternoon session is a navigation walk. I need open terrain for that. A vendor demonstration space is a 10 by 10 tent. It's a covered space with electrical access and seating for 30. These families don't need seats, Victor. They need to learn how to read a topographic line." Donovan smiled again, the patient smile, the one that meant I've already decided, and this conversation is a formality. "I'll send you the updated schedule. The 2 o'clock relocation is confirmed." He looked at his tablet one more time, made a note, and then looked up at the group of kids and parents who had all very quietly stopped what they were doing and were watching. He addressed them the way he might address a conference room. "Great stuff, everyone. Apex Outdoor is proud to support this program. We'll have product samples available at the main vendor pavilion from noon to 4. He nodded once at no one in particular and walked away on his two good shoes. Silence. Then the 10-year-old who'd been working on the clove hitch looked up at Lila. "Who was that?" "My sponsor," she said. "He didn't seem very nice." "No," she agreed quietly. "He didn't." She crouched back down next to him. "Okay, show me where you got stuck on this knot." Daniel waited until the session broke for water before he crossed the staging area to where Lila was standing alone, reviewing something on her phone with the focused expression of someone doing math that wasn't working out. "He can't move your session," Daniel said. She looked up. "He already did." "Your program agreement, does it specify location authority? It specifies that Apex has, and I'm quoting here, collaborative input on program scheduling and presentation format, which Victor has decided means he gets to move me wherever he wants, whenever he wants." "That's not what collaborative input means." "No," she said. "But he has the money, and I have a tent that falls down so." She put her phone away. "I'll figure it out." "The navigation walk needs open terrain," Daniel said. "You said it yourself." "I know what I said. I have a map of the Eastern Trail System. There's a section off the maintained path that's level about 4 acres. Not on the official festival grounds, technically. But it's accessible from the East Gate and it's safe." She looked at him. "How do you know it's safe?" "I walked it at 0500 this morning." She stared at him for a second. "You walked it this morning." "The overnight moisture was higher than predicted. I wanted to check the ground stability on the East Trail before the afternoon sessions." "Daniel." She said his name like she was testing the weight of it. "Did you walk that trail for the festival, or did you walk it for my navigation session?" He held her gaze. "For the festival." She didn't argue, but the way she didn't argue told him she didn't believe it. "The East Gate," she said finally. "What time?" "Bring your group by 1:30. I'll have the route cleared and marked." She nodded slowly, then, "You know he's going to push back harder if we go around him." "I know." That doesn't bother you. Men like Donovan operate on the assumption that everyone around them will calculate the cost of resistance and decide it's too high. He looked at her steadily. I've been in rooms where the cost of resistance was considerably higher than a scheduling dispute, so no, it doesn't bother me. She was quiet for a moment. Something moved through her expression, not quite surprise, not quite admiration. Something more honest than either of those. 1:30, she said. Don't be late. I'm never late. She paused. I'm occasionally early. You were 13 minutes early this morning. I said occasionally. At 1:15, Daniel was at the east gate with the route marked survey flags pressed into the ground at 40-foot intervals. Every soft spot bypassed a clear path through the 4-acre section that was solid underfoot and wide enough for families with strollers. He'd also, without entirely planning, cleared a flat area near the northern edge where the sight lines were good enough to demonstrate compass reading against 3 visible landmarks. It was a better setup than anything Donovan's vendor tent could have offered. He didn't examine why he'd put in the extra work. At 1:28, he heard them coming. Lila's voice first carrying over the low sound of the trail, she was talking to a mother who was explaining apologetically that her son had ADHD and sometimes needed a moment. And Lila was saying, "Perfect, he can help me lead the group. I need someone who moves at his own speed." And the mother had gone quiet in the way people go quiet when someone says exactly the right thing without knowing they needed to hear it. They came through the gate in a loose cluster, 11 families, 23 kids. A grandfather, Walt Daniel, had learned his name now carrying his own compass, which he'd clearly owned for at least 30 years. Lila stopped when she saw the flags, the cleared path, the demonstration area. She looked at Daniel. He said, "I had time." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to the group. "Okay, everyone. Welcome to the part of the clinic where we actually go outside." The kids cheered. The parents looked relieved. Walt held up his compass like a torch. Hey, he meant to stay at the perimeter. He had a list of tasks. Afternoon drainage check. Sandbag count. A report due to Greg by 4 p.m. that he hadn't started yet. He stayed for 2 hours, not watching, helping. When a compass confused a father, Daniel walked him through it in 3 sentences. When a 7-year-old girl couldn't see the landmark Lila was pointing to, Daniel crouched down to her eye level, aligned her arm, and said, "There, the bent tree, see it?" And she said, "Oh," like a small explosion of discovery, and he felt something in his chest shift slightly to the left, in a way he didn't have language for. Lila worked the group the way she always worked them, loose, human, funny when it helped, and serious when it mattered. But he noticed things about her he hadn't from the perimeter. She remembered every kid's name after hearing it once. She noticed when someone went quiet and moved to them without making it obvious she'd noticed. She let people fail at things, knots, compass readings, trail calls, and then she named the failure like it was data, not damage. Good. Now you know what doesn't work. That's actually the useful information. She was, he thought, one of the most structurally intelligent people he'd encountered. She just expressed it in a way that looked like chaos from the outside. He filed that observation away. Didn't know what to do with it. At 3:40, a kid named Marcus, 8 years old, round-faced, the one who'd invented the Bailey knot, came to stand next to Daniel at the edge of the group. "Are you a soldier?" Marcus asked. "Was," Daniel said. "My grandpa was in the army." "Good for him." Marcus considered this. "Do you have kids?" Daniel looked at him. "A daughter. She's 7. "Is she here?" "She's with her aunt." "How come she's not here with you?" There was a pause. Daniel looked across the group to where Lila was now teaching Walt how to adjust for magnetic declination. Both of them bent over the compass with the intensity of 2 people arguing theology. "I haven't figured out how to make this kind of thing work with her yet," he said. He didn't know why he said it to an 8-year-old. Maybe because 8-year-olds didn't ask follow-up questions that hurt. Marcus nodded seriously. "My mom says some things take practice." "Your mom's right." "She says that about everything, though." He wandered back to the group. Daniel watched him go. Tag. Victor Donovan reappeared at 3:55. He came through the east gate with Greg Falwell beside him, and the expression on his face was the specific kind of controlled tight jaw. Even breathing careful eyes that Daniel recognized as a man who was angry and had decided to be strategic about it. Greg looked uncomfortable. He usually did around Daniel, who he'd described in the staff notes. Daniel had seen the notes as highly competent, minimal interpersonal flexibility, which was accurate enough. Dr. Hart. Donovan stopped at the edge of the cleared area. Your 2 o'clock session was supposed to be at the vendor pavilion. Lila had her back to him. She turned around slowly. We had a conflict with the space. What kind of conflict? The kind where my families needed open terrain and you gave me a tent. This area, Donovan said, looking at the flags. The cleared path, the families still moving through the last section of the route, is not part of the festival operational zone. It's accessible from the east gate, which is festival property, Daniel said. Donovan looked at him. You authorized this. I assessed the terrain this morning. It's safe. The families are on a marked route with appropriate supervision. That's within my maintenance authority. Your maintenance authority. Donovan let the word sit. Your grounds crew Reeves. Yes, sir. Then stay in your lane. The words landed in the open air, and nobody moved. Daniel looked at Donovan with the particular stillness of a man who had been told far more threatening things than that by far more dangerous men, and had simply waited until it was time to act. My lane, Daniel said quietly, is festival safety. Every person on this route is safe. Every piece of terrain has been assessed. The families are learning practical skills that fall within Dr. Hart's approved program parameters. He paused. If you want to file a formal objection, I'd suggest putting it in writing and submitting it through the coordinator's office. Greg knows the process. Greg, who absolutely did not want to be Greg right now, made a small sound of confirmation. Donovan's jaw moved. He looked at Lila. He looked at Daniel. He looked at the families behind them, at the kids with their compasses at Walt, holding his up to the late afternoon light, at the mother whose son was leading the group at his own pace, with a survey flag in his hand like a banner. We'll discuss this tonight, Donovan said. We can do that, Lila said. He left. Greg followed, sending Daniel a look over his shoulder that said, I don't know what you're doing, but please, don't make my weekend worse. Lila waited until they were through the gate. Then she turned to Daniel. She didn't say thank you. She said, You called him sir. Habit. That was the most aggressive use of sir I've ever heard. It was polite. It was not polite. But the corner of her mouth moved. It was something, though. He looked at her. Something he wanted to say formed and didn't find its way out. He looked back at the group instead, at Walt, with his compass at the kid, with the flag at all of it, moving the way things move when someone has organized the space properly and then stepped back and let people be human inside it. You've got about 20 minutes of light left on this route, he said. She nodded. I know. She turned back to her group. Then, without looking at him, Daniel. Yeah, she should come. Your daughter. Tomorrow, if you wanted. He was quiet for a moment. Her name's Rosie, he said. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. But he also didn't walk away. Rosie arrived at 8:40 the next morning wearing rain boots that didn't match, one yellow, one green, and carrying a stuffed rabbit she'd named Captain, who had, according to her, survived 17 camping trips and one tornado. Though Daniel suspected the tornado was a story she'd added recently for dramatic effect. She walked into the staging area like she owned it, looked around at the equipment crates and the rope lines and the families starting to gather, and then looked up at her father with the specific expression of a 7-year-old who has just decided something is interesting. Is that the lady? She said. Daniel had approximately 1 second to respond before Lila appeared from behind the gear table, saw Rosie, and stopped. Is that Captain? Lila said, looking at the rabbit. Rosie's entire face changed. You know about Captain... Your dad mentioned him. She crouched down to Rosie's level. 17 camping trips, right? And a tornado. Impressive resume. Lila held out her hand, serious as a handshake. I'm Lila. Rosie shook it with her whole arm. I'm Rosie. My dad said I could come, but I had to listen and not touch anything without asking. That's a very reasonable rule. Lila glanced up at Daniel. Your dad's pretty good at reasonable rules. Daniel said nothing. He was watching his daughter the way he always watched her, quietly from a precise distance, cataloging everything. The way she'd already decided she liked Lila. The way she was holding Captain a little looser than usual, which meant she was comfortable. The way she was already looking at the paracord on the equipment crate like it was an invitation. Something in his chest did the shifting thing again. He ignored it. Stay where I can see you, he told Rosie. Okay, Dad. She was already walking away with Lila. By 10 o'clock, Rosie had learned 2 knots, attempted a third, that she declared broken, and appointed herself Lila's assistant for the compass demonstration by the simple method of standing next to Lila and handing things to her before she asked for them. Lila accepted this arrangement without comment, which was the right call. Rosie didn't respond well to being redirected. She responded to being included. Daniel watched this from the perimeter and tried to remember the last time someone had understood his daughter that quickly. He came up empty. Carol knew Rosie knew her well, loved her fiercely, but there was always a beat of adjustment, a moment of recalibration when Rosie shifted gears unexpectedly. His sister was good at it, but it was visible. The effort was there. With Lila there was no effort. Or if there was, it was invisible. She just moved with Rosie. Matched her frequency without thinking about it. He turned back to his clipboard before he could think about that too long. His phone buzzed. Carol. How's she doing? He typed back. Fine. Then, after a pause, good. Carol sent back a single emoji. The one with the wide eyes. He put his phone away. The morning would have been clean if Victor Donovan hadn't called Greg Falwell before breakfast. Daniel didn't know that yet at 10 o'clock. He found out at 11 when Greg appeared at the east edge of the staging area with the expression of a man who'd been on the phone for 45 minutes and had lost every argument. Daniel. Greg stopped beside him, didn't look at him directly. I need to talk to you about last night. The route, and the yeah. Greg exhaled. Donovan filed a formal complaint this morning. Unauthorized use of non-festival terrain, potential liability exposure, and what he called systematic interference with sponsor programming. The terrain was safe. I documented the assessment. I know you did. I have it. Greg rubbed the back of his neck. The problem isn't the assessment. The problem is Donovan has a contract with the festival that gives Apex Outdoor primary programming authority over all educational sessions, and Lila's clinic is listed as an educational session. Her clinic was listed before Apex came on as a sponsor. Doesn't matter how it was listed before. Matters how the contract reads now. Greg finally looked at him. He wants the afternoon sessions moved to the vendor pavilion. Both of them. Today and tomorrow. The navigation session doesn't work in a vendor pavilion. I know that. The fire safety demonstration needs a cleared exterior zone. You can't do that in a 10 by 10 tent. I know that too, Daniel. Then tell him no. Greg looked at him with the expression of a man who had a mortgage and a kid in college and a festival contract that needed renewal in the spring. It's not that simple. It is that simple. You're the coordinator. He's the money. The words landed flat between them. Daniel looked at Greg. Really looked at him and saw something he recognized. Not a bad man. Not a coward. Just a man who'd been calculating costs for so long he'd forgotten there were some things that shouldn't be calculated. If you move her sessions, Daniel said carefully, you're going to have families who drove 3 hours for an outdoor skills clinic sitting in a tent looking at gear catalogs. And some of those families are going to tell other families, and by next year, your registration numbers are going to reflect that. Greg blinked. That wasn't the argument he'd expected. I can't promise. I'm not asking you to promise anything. I'm telling you what happens when you let sponsors run the program instead of the program running itself. Daniel held his gaze. You hired me because you wanted problems solved before they became problems. This is me solving a problem. Greg was quiet for a long moment. I'll talk to him again, he said finally. I can't promise anything. That's enough. Greg left. Daniel watched him go. Then he turned back to the staging area where Rosie was now sitting cross-legged on the ground next to a 5-year-old he didn't know, showing her with complete seriousness how Captain the Rabbit could be used as a navigation reference point by facing him in the direction of the wind. It wasn't accurate, but the 5-year-old was completely riveted. Daniel went back to his clipboard, wrote nothing on it, stood there for a moment with the pen in his hand. Lila found out about the complaint at noon from Greg, who delivered the news with the apologetic efficiency of a man who had already told this story twice and wanted it to be over. Daniel was close enough to watch her face when she heard it. She didn't get loud. That surprised him, or it would have surprised him 2 days ago. Now he understood that Lila Hart's version of anger was compression, not explosion. She got quieter, more precise. Her sentences shortened by about 40%. "So he went over my head," she said. "He went to me," Greg said. "I'm not exactly—" "He knew you'd have to tell me. That's going over my head." She looked at the ground for a moment. "What's the call, Greg?" "I'm still working on it." "What's the working on it version?" "Afternoon sessions in the vendor pavilion. Morning sessions stay where they are." "The afternoon session is the navigation walk." "I know." "You can't do a navigation walk in a pavilion, Greg." "I know that, Lila." She went quiet. Not the thinking kind of quiet, the kind of quiet that means someone is deciding how much of themselves they're willing to spend on a fight. Daniel had been at the perimeter. He was not at the perimeter anymore. "The East Trail is still available," he said. Both of them looked at him. Donovan's complaint was about last night's session. He hasn't filed anything about the East Trail. Specifically, he filed about non-festival terrain. The East Trail connects directly to the festival's eastern boundary. I can reclassify it as an extension of the maintenance access route, which falls under my operational authority, not the programming schedule. Greg stared at him. "Can you actually do that?" "I'm doing it right now." "That's—" Greg opened his mouth, closed it. "That's probably going to make Donovan very unhappy." "Yes." "He's going to push back harder." "He can push as hard as he wants," Daniel said. "I've documented every safety assessment, every route marking, every family on record. If he wants to file a formal grievance, it goes through the festival's liability committee, which meets in October, which is after this weekend is over." He looked at Greg steadily. "Which means the families who came here for an outdoor skills clinic get the outdoor skills clinic they paid for." Greg looked at Lila, looked at Daniel, looked at the staging area where 11 families were eating lunch and Rosie was attempting to teach Captain the Rabbit to hold a compass. "I didn't hear any of this," Greg said. "Understood." Greg walked away with the particular stride of a man who had just made a decision by refusing to make a decision and was at peace with that. Lila waited until he was gone. Then she looked at Daniel with an expression that was harder to read than usual, layered. Like there were 2 or 3 things happening behind it simultaneously. "You know what you're doing, right?" she said. "He's not going to stop." "I know." "He has money and lawyers and a signed contract." "I know that too." "So why?" She stopped, started again. "Why are you doing this? And don't say maintenance. I'm serious." He held her gaze. He didn't answer right away, not because he didn't know, but because the honest answer was the kind of thing he didn't have a lot of practice saying out loud. "Because what you're doing matters," he said finally. "What you're teaching those families matters, and someone with a vendor contract and a branded water bottle shouldn't get to hollow it out just because he got there with more money." She looked at him for a long time. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." She turned back toward the group. Then, without turning around, "Rosie taught my youngest participant that rabbits can navigate by wind direction this morning. I saw." Is that something you taught her?" "No." "Where'd she get it?" "I have no idea," he said. "She comes up with things." There was a pause. When Lila turned around again, the expression on her face had changed softer, something in it that wasn't quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. "She's remarkable, Daniel." He didn't say anything, but he didn't look away either. The afternoon session ran on the East Trail. Donovan knew about it by 3 o'clock. Daniel could tell by the way the man moved through the festival grounds that afternoon, purposeful tight-making calls on his phone, with the focused displeasure of someone reorganizing a plan. He didn't come to the trail. Daniel suspected he was calculating. Men like Donovan always calculated before they struck. That was both their strength and their weakness. They telegraphed the strike by the pause before it. Daniel kept the group moving. Lila ran the navigation session with the same loose precision he'd come to recognize as her signature structure: underneath warmth on top, challenge in between. Rosie stayed close to Daniel for the first half, then gradually migrated toward the front of the group, then somehow ended up next to Walt, who was showing her how to use his 30-year-old compass and explaining with great seriousness that the newer ones weren't as trustworthy. "This one," Walt said, patting the compass, "came back from Vietnam with my father." Rosie looked at it like it had a story she wanted to hear. "Did it help him find his way home?" she asked. Walt was quiet for a moment. "I think it did," he said. Daniel heard this from 6 feet away. He kept walking. He didn't trust himself to stop. At 5:30, after the families had gone and the trail was cleared, and Rosie was sitting against an equipment crate with Captain in her lap, and her eyes fighting sleep. Daniel was coiling rope when his phone rang. It was a number he didn't have saved. He answered it anyway. "Mr. Reeves," Donovan's voice. Smooth and controlled, and under it very clearly not. "I think we should talk." "We can talk." "Not on the phone. Tonight, 7 o'clock, the main pavilion." Daniel looked at Rosie, at the trail behind him, at the rope in his hands. "7 o'clock, he said. "Come alone." He almost said something about that. He didn't. "Good evening, Mr. Donovan." He hung up. Lila was standing nearby. She'd heard enough. "He wants a meeting," she said. "Tonight." "What's he going to offer?" Daniel thought about it. "He's going to offer you something. A reframe, more visibility, better signage, a featured spot in their catalog. Make it look like an upgrade. And if I don't take it, then he goes to Greg with something harder, probably a formal liability claim around the route, something that forces Greg's hand." She crossed her arms. "Not defensive thinking." "How do you know that's how he operates?" "Because it's how people operate when they have resources and a deadline. First they offer. When that doesn't work, they escalate to something that takes the decision out of your hands." He looked at her. "He's not going to give up the program. He spent real money on this sponsorship and he needs it to perform a certain way for his board." "So what do we do?" The "we" landed without comment. Neither of them noted it. Neither of them stepped back from it. "We go to the meeting," Daniel said. She looked at him. "You said he told you to come alone." "He did. And I'm choosing to interpret that as a general suggestion rather than a tactical instruction." He picked up the coiled rope. "He'll have someone with him anyway. Men like that always do." Lila uncrossed her arms. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, not quite relief. Something that looked more like the expression of someone who had been managing alone for long enough that not managing alone felt strange and real and slightly terrifying. "What about Rosie?" she said. They both looked at her, asleep now, fully with Captain tucked under her chin and her mismatched rain boots still on. "Carol can come get her," Daniel said. "She drove 3 miles this morning to watch her niece attend a camping clinic," Lila said. "That's a good person." "She is." He pulled out his phone. "She's also going to ask me questions I don't have answers to yet." "About the meeting." He didn't answer right away. He was looking at Rosie, at the rabbit, at the trail behind them, and the festival lights starting to come on across the grounds as the evening settled in. "About all of it," he said. Lila nodded. She picked up her gear bag. She looked at him one more time, that reading look, the one she'd had since the first morning with the collapsed tent, like she was working something out and getting closer, but wasn't finished yet. 7 o'clock, she said. 7 o'clock. She walked away toward the main grounds. Daniel called Carol, then sat down on the equipment crate next to his sleeping daughter and let the evening come in without checking his watch for the first time in 3 days. It was 5:47 p.m. He sat there until Carol arrived. He didn't move once. Carol arrived at 6:20, which meant she had time to look at Daniel, the way only older sisters look at younger brothers, like she was reading a document he hadn't meant to leave open. She picked up Rosie without waking her, settled her against her shoulder, and then stood there for a moment, looking at the staging area. The cleared ground, the equipment crates, the survey flags still visible at the edge of the East Trail. "You did all this," she said. It wasn't a question. "It's my job." The job was grounds maintenance. She shifted Rosie's weight. "This looks like something else." Daniel picked up Rosie's rain boots, which had come off somewhere in the last hour, and tucked them under his arm. "She needs to be in bed by 8:30. She'll fight it. Don't negotiate." "I know how to put my niece to bed, Daniel. 8:30. No negotiating." "You said that already." Carol looked at him for another moment. "Is she nice?" He handed her the boots. 8:30. Carol smiled small, knowing the exact smile he'd been trying to avoid, and walked to her car. He watched until the taillights disappeared. Then he checked his watch. 6:31. He had 29 minutes. He used 6 of them standing still. The main pavilion was a large open-sided tent structure at the center of the festival grounds, the kind of space that looked impressive from a distance and felt hollow up close, all branded signage and sponsor banners, and the particular emptiness of a place designed for performance rather than people. At this hour, the afternoon crowds had moved to the evening lantern preparation areas, and the pavilion held maybe a dozen people, vendors breaking down displays, a couple of staffers with lanyards, and at the far end at a table that had been set up with 2 chairs, and a third one slightly to the side Victor Donovan. He had someone with him. A younger man in a quarter zip with a tablet who had the quiet, expensive presence of a lawyer or a consultant or someone trained to observe without being observed. Daniel clocked him in the first second and filed him accordingly. Donovan stood when he saw Daniel, looked past him for a moment. "Dr. Hart isn't joining us." "She is," Daniel said. As if on cue, Lila came through the pavilion entrance from the other side. She'd come around the long way, which Daniel noted and respected. She'd wanted her own entry point, her own angle. She wasn't walking into this behind him. She pulled the third chair, the one slightly to the side, directly across from Donovan, and sat in it. Donovan looked at the chair placement, looked at her. Let it go. "Thank you both for coming," he said. The smooth voice, the practiced calm. "I thought it was time we talked directly without the intermediary steps." "You mean without going through Greg?" Lila said. "I mean without unnecessary friction." He opened a folder on the table, printed pages. Daniel didn't look at them yet. He watched Donovan's hands, his eyes the micro-tension in his jaw that the smooth voice was working to cover. "Dr. Hart, I want to be clear that Apex Outdoor values what you're doing here. The family engagement, the educational component, that's exactly the kind of authentic content that resonates with our customer base." "Our customer base," Lila said. "Our shared audience." He smiled, adjusted. "What I'm proposing is a restructuring, not a reduction of your program. Full Apex branding integration, a featured slot in our fall catalog, and a stipend that is," he slid one of the pages across, "considerably more than your current festival compensation." Lila looked at the number, didn't touch the page. "And in return," she said, "in return, all sessions run through the Apex programming framework. Structured curriculum, branded materials, product demonstration integrated into the skill instruction." He paused. "It's a significant upgrade, Lila. I think if you step back from the emotion of this weekend—" "I'm not emotional," she said. "I'm specific. Tell me what product demonstration integrated into skill instruction means in practice." He didn't miss a beat. "It means when you're teaching fire safety, you're using Apex fire kits. When you're teaching navigation, you're using Apex compasses. When families leave your session, they know what gear made their experience possible. And if a family can't afford Apex gear—" He blinked, just once. "I'm sorry. If a family comes to the festival, a family that saved for months to be here, that drove from somewhere they don't have trails or open land, and they can't afford a $140 Apex compass, What happens in your version of my program? Do they still get to learn navigation, or do they sit and watch while the families who can afford the kit get the experience? Donovan's jaw moved. There would be loaner equipment, in your contract framework, or in mine. That's a detail we can work out. That's not a detail, Lila said. Her voice hadn't risen, hadn't sharpened. It was just precise. That's the entire point. The families in my clinic right now are not your customer base. Some of them are. But some of them are people who have never done this before and needed someone to tell them they could. That's not a catalog moment. That's not an impressions metric. That's a person finding out they're capable of something they didn't know they were capable of, and you can't put a product logo on that without changing what it is. The pavilion was quiet around them. The consultant with the tablet had stopped typing. Donovan looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Daniel. You've been helping her block every logistical move I've made since Thursday, he said. Not accusatory observational, like he was recalculating something. I've been doing my job, Daniel said. Your job is maintenance. My job is safety, operational continuity, making sure the festival runs the way the festival is supposed to run. He held Donovan's gaze. Dr. Hart's program is part of this festival. It was part of it before Apex came on board. My job is to support that. Technically speaking, Daniel said, I have documentation on every assessment, every route, every family who participated in every session. I have it time-stamped and filed with the festival coordinator. If Apex wants to file a formal liability claim around the East Trail sessions, that documentation will be part of the record. He paused. Which means the question of whether a sponsor can reroute an independently contracted educational program to serve their catalog needs, that question gets answered in writing. Formally. Publicly. Another pause. I don't know what Apex's board thinks about that kind of public record, but I suspect you do. The consultant set his tablet face down on the table. Donovan looked at Daniel for a long moment. The smooth voice didn't slip, but behind the eyes, something was recalculating. Rapidly. You're willing to make this difficult, he said. I'm not making anything difficult, Daniel said. I'm doing paperwork. It was the flattest possible delivery. And somehow, that was what landed. Lila pressed her lips together. Did not smile. Almost. Donovan leaned back in his chair. He looked at the folder. At the page Lila hadn't touched. At the consultant who was now looking at the middle distance with practiced neutrality. I'll need to review some things, he said. Take your time, Lila said. They left the table with nothing signed, nothing promised, and nothing resolved, which was... Daniel thought exactly the right outcome for this particular meeting. Donovan hadn't been stopped. He'd been slowed. There was a difference, and it mattered. Outside the pavilion, the festival evening was in full swing. Lantern prep stations had opened along the main trail, families sitting at long tables with paper and wire frames, the low hum of people doing something careful with their hands. The smell of the evening pine and wood smoke, and the particular clean of Wisconsin late summer, came in off the fields in a wave. Lila walked beside him without speaking for a moment. Then, the paperwork line. It worked, he said. It was beautiful. She shook her head. I have never seen a man threaten someone with documentation before. It wasn't a threat. Victor Donovan's face said otherwise. He almost smiled. He didn't. He's not done, Daniel said. I know. She glanced at him. You know what he's going to do next. He's going to find something structural, something he can take to Greg that Greg can't navigate around an actual clause, an actual liability angle. He'll spend tonight finding it and come back tomorrow with it. What do we do when he does? Daniel was quiet for a moment. They were passing the edge of the lantern prep area, and a kid 8-9 years old held up a half-finished lantern frame toward him, like he wanted an assessment. Daniel looked at it, reached over without breaking stride, adjusted one crosswire with 2 fingers, and kept walking. We make sure tomorrow's sessions are undeniable, he said. We make sure every family who participates has an experience so clear and so real that when Donovan makes his move, Greg has to weigh it against something concrete. He paused. Greg is a reasonable man in an unreasonable position. He needs to be given something to stand on. And the lantern walk. She said it carefully. The final evening walk, that's the centerpiece. That's what all the families came for. If Donovan moves on that, he won't move on that tonight. Tonight he recalculates. Daniel looked ahead. Tomorrow is what matters. Tomorrow came in fast and hard and from the wrong direction. Daniel was at his post by 5:50 a.m., running his perimeter check in the gray pre-dawn when he found the East Trail, or rather what was left of it. Overnight, the weather system that had been sitting on the western edge of the county had rolled through quietly and taken its time. The trail markers were intact, but the ground told a different story. Significant moisture infiltration on the northern curve, 2 soft zones that hadn't been soft yesterday, and at the bend where the trail widened into the demonstration area, a drainage failure that had turned 30 feet of clear path into a slow mudslide. Not dangerous to walk through, but impossible to run a family clinic on. A family with a stroller and a 4-year-old didn't cross uncertain ground. A grandmother with bad knees didn't cross uncertain ground. A father carrying a kid on his shoulders didn't cross uncertain ground. The trail was gone. Daniel stood at the edge of the mud and did the math. He had, depending on when Lila's morning session started, somewhere between 2 and 3 hours. He pulled out his grounds map, the one he'd been updating every morning, the annotated version with his own notations in the margins, the one nobody else had seen because nobody else had walked this property at 5:50 a.m. for 4 days straight. He looked at the map, looked at the terrain around him. Then he turned north. He'd found the North Meadow on day 2. It wasn't on the official festival map. It predated the current property management and old grazing field that connected to the festival's northeastern boundary through a gap in a deteriorating fence line. He'd documented it, flagged it as accessible but unverified, made a note to check the ground stability when he had time. He hadn't had time. He had time now. He moved through the fence gap and into the meadow in the early gray light, and what he found was exactly what he'd estimated from the terrain, red on day 2, but hadn't let himself count on level ground firm underfoot, even after the overnight moisture. Natural clearing of about 6 acres with clear sight lines in 3 directions, and at the northern edge, a rise that would give a compass orientation exercise, the kind of real landmark reference you couldn't manufacture. He walked the entire perimeter, pressed his boot into the ground every 20 feet, checked the drainage gradient, estimated the foot traffic capacity for the family group size, filed everything in the notated map. Then he pulled out his phone and looked at the time. 6:47. He called Greg. Greg answered on the 3rd ring with the voice of a man who had not slept well. Yeah. The East Trail is compromised. Drainage failure overnight. I need to reclassify the morning session location. A pause. Where? North Meadow. I'm standing in it. It's clean, it's level, it's stable. He looked around. It's better than the East Trail. Is it festival property? It connects through the northeastern boundary. Daniel, that's not a yes. It's a yes-adjacent answer from a man who has been on this property for 4 days and knows it better than anyone currently working this festival. He kept his voice even. The families arrive in 2 hours. I need a decision. Another pause. Longer. He could hear Greg doing the same calculation he'd watched him do twice before. Cost of yes, cost of no, which one he could live with. I didn't hear this conversation, Greg said. Understood. He hung up and started marking the route. Lila arrived at 8:50 and found him at the meadow entrance with survey flags in his hand and mud on his boots up to the ankle. She stopped, looked at the meadow behind him, looked at him. The East Trail, she said. Overnight drainage failure. And you found this. I found this on day 2. You've had a backup trail for 2 days and didn't tell me. I didn't need to tell you until I needed to tell you. She stared at him. That is the most Daniel Reeves sentence anyone has ever said. He handed her a survey flag. South marker, 40 feet in. Push it in at 45 degrees. She took the flag. You walked this at dawn. Pre-dawn. Of course. She looked at the flag, at him, at the meadow spreading out behind him in the morning light. It's beautiful. It's functional. Daniel. She said his name with a patience that held something else inside it. It's also beautiful. Both things can be true. He looked at the meadow. He'd been looking at it as terrain gradient stability capacity sightlines. He hadn't looked at it the other way. He looked at it the other way for a moment. Both things can be true, he said. She was already walking in with the survey flag. Yeah. The morning session ran cleaner than any session before it. 12 families, the word had kept spreading, and 3 new ones had shown up at the staging area at 9 with the hopeful, uncertain energy of people who almost didn't come and then did. Lila took them all. Daniel ran the perimeter and kept one eye on the meadow entrance. Donovan arrived at 10:40. He came with the consultant and a printed document that had the particular weight of something prepared by someone who billed by the hour. He didn't go to the meadow. He went to the staging area first, found it empty, then turned and scanned the grounds with the expression of a man who had prepared for a conversation and couldn't find the room it was supposed to happen in. Daniel walked to him. Mr. Donovan? Donovan looked at him, at the mud on his boots, at the survey flags visible through the tree line, his jaw set. Where is she? Running her morning session. The East Trail is compromised. Yes, I rerouted. To where? Daniel held his gaze. To wherever she needs to be. Donovan looked at the document in his hand. This was the moment Daniel had been watching for, the moment when the prepared move meets the reality that's already moved past it. He saw Donovan assess the situation. Recalculate again. Decide something. Tonight, Donovan said. The Lantern Walk. That is a festival-wide event. It is not under Dr. Hart's program. It is not under your maintenance authority. And it runs on the main trail, which I have confirmed with Greg is currently unusable due to last night's weather. He held up the document. Apex Outdoor is formally offering to fund and coordinate an alternative lantern route through the South Vendor Corridor, which puts us in operational control of the closing event. Daniel looked at the document. He didn't take it. The main trail is compromised, he said. It wasn't a question. The primary section east of Marker 12 is a mud issue, confirmed this morning. Daniel said nothing for a moment. He was running the grounds map in his head, the annotated version, the one with 4 days of his own observations layered into it. He was looking for something Donovan hadn't found yet. He found it. The South Cutoff, he said slowly. What? There's a terrain feature at Marker 9. Old drainage berm, 2 feet high, runs parallel to the main trail for about 60 yards. If you use that as a natural barrier and reroute the trail to the west side of it, you bypass the compromised section entirely. Rejoins the main trail at Marker 14. He looked up from the map he wasn't holding. The main trail is still viable. The Lantern Walk runs as planned. Donovan's expression went through something. Where is that on the festival map? It's not on the festival map. He met his eyes. It's on mine. A long silence. Show me, Donovan said. No, Daniel said. I'll show Greg, and I'll show the families walking their lanterns tonight, and then it won't matter what's on your map or mine. He tucked the annotated grounds report he'd been holding under his arm. If you want to come to the Lantern Walk, Mr. Donovan, you're welcome to come. Bring your catalog. He turned and walked back to the meadow. He could feel Donovan standing there behind him with the printed document in his hand. He didn't turn around. At noon, he called Carol. She answered immediately. How is she? Rosie's good. She's with Lila's group right now. He paused. I need you to bring her tonight, for the Lantern Walk. A pause on Carol's end. You need me to bring her? Yes. Daniel, you're asking me to bring Rosie to a Lantern Walk at a festival where you are currently, from what I can piece together from a 7-year-old's very detailed account, in some kind of standoff with a corporate sponsor, while also doing trail navigation with a woman whose name Rosie mentioned 11 times between dinner and bedtime. He waited. 11, Carol repeated. Can you bring her? He said. A pause. Then warmly, we'll be there at 7. He hung up. Looked at the meadow where Lila was teaching a father and his teenage son to read a topographic line together, the father's hand over the son's. Both of them bent over the map, the son pointing at something that made the father nod slowly. Daniel watched that for a moment. Something in his chest moved in a direction he was tired of cataloging and had stopped trying to name. He had a lot of work to do before 7. He went back to work. He spent the afternoon on his knees in the mud. Not metaphorically. Literally boots soaked through hands in the ground, driving stakes along the south cut-off route while the festival moved around him like water around a stone. He worked the way he always worked when something mattered, without announcing it, without stopping, without checking to see if anyone was watching. No one was watching. That was fine. That was how he preferred it. The south cutoff was exactly what he'd said. It was a viable reroute, cleaner than the compromised main trail, rejoining at marker 14, with enough clearance for strollers and slow walkers, and Walt with his 30-year-old compass. Daniel flagged it in full, tested every soft zone, reinforced 3 anchor points where the berm edge was uncertain, and walked the complete route twice before he was satisfied. The second walk he did in the dark. Not because he needed to, the light was still good at 6:15 when he finished, but because the families would be walking it in low lantern light, and he needed to know what they would see and what they wouldn't. Where the ground would surprise them. Where the path narrowed and someone carrying a child on their hip would need to know to shift their weight. He walked it the way he'd once walked routes that had real consequences, and he felt for the first time in longer than he could name that the precision wasn't just habit. It was care. It was the same thing. It had always been the same thing. He'd just forgotten to call it that. At 6:48 he sent Greg a text. South cutoff is clear and flagged. Main route bypasses compromised section at marker 9. Walk runs as scheduled. Greg responded in 40 seconds. Thank you, I mean it. Daniel put his phone away and went to wash his hands. Carol arrived at 7 on the dot with Rosie in her festival jacket. The orange one she'd insisted on packing, even though Daniel had told her it would be too warm, and Captain tucked under one arm. Rosie spotted her father from 30 feet away and came at him at a speed that was somewhere between a run and a controlled fall. He caught her. Lifted her without thinking about it, the way he'd been lifting her since she was 2 pounds lighter and 6 inches shorter, and the world was a different shape. Dad, she set it into his shoulder. Is it tonight, the lanterns? It's tonight. She pulled back to look at him. Her eyes were wide and very serious. Can Captain carry one? Captain can hold the base of yours if you keep a hand on the frame. She considered this. That's fair. She looked around. Where's Lila? She's getting the families ready. Can I help? He set her down. Looked at her, the orange jacket, the mismatched energy, the rabbit under her arm, the total absence of doubt in her face about whether she belonged here. Yeah, he said. You can help. Carol was standing behind them. When Daniel looked up, she had the expression she'd been wearing since he was 19 years old, and she'd figured out that the best way to handle him was to say nothing and let things arrive at their own speed. 8:30, he said. She can stay till 9, Carol said. It's a lantern walk, Daniel. Let her see the whole thing. He looked at her. 9, he said. Carol smiled. I'll be at the main gate. Lila was at the lantern prep station with the last of the families when Daniel and Rosie found her a long table at the trailhead covered in assembled frames, tissue paper panels in amber and white, and small LED inserts that glowed like captured firelight. Around it, maybe 40 people total, the clinic families, a handful of additional festival guests who'd heard about the rerouted walk, and Walt, who had brought a friend his age and was explaining the compass significance of true north versus magnetic north to a man who was clearly not following but was being very polite about it. Rosie broke away from Daniel's side immediately and went to Lila. Lila was in the middle of helping a mother repair a bent frame wire, and she looked up when she heard Rosie's boots on the path. Those boots still mismatched yellow and green, and something in her face opened in a way that Daniel had stopped trying not to notice. There she is, Lila said. And Captain, right on time. Right. Dad said I can help. Rosie set Captain carefully on the edge of the table. Captain is going to supervise. Excellent. Lila looked up at Daniel over Rosie's head. Something passed between them, not a word, not even quite a look. Just a recognition. The kind that doesn't need language because it's already past the point where language is the right tool. He nodded once. moved to the far end of the table, and began checking frames. Donovan arrived at 7:20. He came alone this time. No consultant, no printed documents. He stood at the edge of the prep area for a moment, watching the families finish their lanterns, watching Rosie hold up a finished frame for a 4-year-old to see her reflection in the tissue paper, watching Lila move through the group, the way she always moved. No wasted motion, full attention present in a way that most people spent their whole lives trying to perform and never quite achieving. Then he walked to Daniel. Daniel had seen him coming for 40 seconds. He kept working. "The cutoff route," Donovan said. "It's flagged and clear." Greg confirmed it. A pause. "It wasn't on any map I had." "No." Another pause. "How long have you known about it?" "Day 2. Donovan was quiet for a moment. Daniel finished checking the frame in his hands, set it down, picked up the next one. "I'm going to be honest with you," Donovan said. "All right, I didn't come to this festival to be the villain." He said it without the smooth voice, just words flat and real. "I came because Apex has a product line that genuinely helps people get outside. I came because I thought this was an opportunity to connect that with something authentic." He paused. "I think I handled it wrong." Daniel set down the frame, looked at him. "You tried to own it," Daniel said, "instead of supporting it." Donovan absorbed that. "Yeah. There's a difference. I know that now." He looked across the prep area at Lila. "She's not going to forgive the week I just put her through. That's her call to make." "I know." He looked back at Daniel. "The Lantern Walk Tonight Apex didn't fund the cutoff route. You built it. Those flags are yours." He paused. "I'd like to not pretend otherwise." Daniel studied him. This was either genuine, or it was the most sophisticated version of the move he hadn't seen coming. He waited a moment, listening for the thing underneath the words the way he'd learned to listen in rooms where getting it wrong had real consequences. He heard nothing. Just a man recalculating himself, not his strategy. "Then don't pretend otherwise," Daniel said. Donovan nodded once. He looked at the lantern table one more time. At Rosie, who had appointed herself official quality inspector, and was holding each finished lantern up to the evening light with the seriousness of a federal auditor. At Walt, who had somehow ended up with a lantern frame in his lap and was actually making something. "She's good at this," Donovan said. He meant Lila. "Yes," Daniel said, "she is." Donovan put his hands in his pockets and walked away toward the main grounds. He didn't come back. The walk began at 8. 43 people moved down the south cutoff in a loose, slow procession, lanterns held at chest height, the amber light from the LED inserts casting everyone's faces in the warm, uncertain glow of something handmade and impermanent and exactly right for what it was. The path held firm underfoot Daniel's 4 days of assessment. His pre-dawn walks, his annotated map, all of it expressed as 43 people moving through the dark, without anyone twisting an ankle or losing confidence in the ground beneath them. Rosie walked beside him with both hands on her lantern frame and Captain folded under her elbow, and she was so focused on keeping the flame light even and steady that she wasn't talking, which was in his experience the rarest version of his daughter, and also the most precious. He walked slowly. Let her set the pace. Lila was at the front of the group, guiding without directing, present in the way she was always present, aware of the whole procession, without making anyone feel managed. He could hear her voice occasionally low and warm, saying something to a parent or crouching to talk to a small child who'd stopped to stare at their lantern like it was the most remarkable object ever made by human hands. Maybe it was. Daniel had never thought about lanterns before this week. He thought about them now. Walt was somewhere in the middle of the group, moving slowly but steadily, his old compass on its lanyard around his neck, even though there was no navigating left to do tonight. He was talking to the friend he'd brought, talking the way old men talk when they've earned the right to take their time with words, and his lantern was slightly crooked but burning strong. At the bend where the south cutoff rejoined the main trail at marker 14, the path opened into the wide meadow approach, the same north meadow Daniel had found at dawn, though they were entering it from the south. Now coming around the long way, and the effect from this angle was different. The meadow opened in front of them like a held breath, finally released the night sky above it, enormous and scattered with stars that the festival lights hadn't reached. The group stopped walking without anyone calling them to stop. It just happened. The way things happen when a moment is large enough. 43 people standing at the edge of the meadow holding lanterns looking up. Rosie pressed against Daniel's side. He felt her shoulder against his hip, her small weight leaning into him, and he put his hand on her head without thinking about it, the way you do with the people you love when something is too large for words, and the only response is contact. "Dad," she whispered. "Yeah. This is the best thing I've ever seen." He looked up at the sky, at the lanterns reflected in the faces around him, at Lila standing at the front of the group who had turned to look back at the procession. At all of it, the families she'd built this for the week she'd fought through the program she'd refused to surrender, and whose expression in the lantern light was something he didn't have a category for, but which he was going to remember for a long time. She found his face in the group, held it. He didn't look away. Jato! At 9:15, 15 minutes past what he'd promised Carol, and he had absolutely noted this, the lanterns were released. Not all at once. One at a time, family by family, the LED inserts removed and replaced with the real lights, small legal biodegradable, that the festival had certified for release. Each family held their lantern for a moment before letting it go. Some people said something, some people didn't. Rosie held hers with both hands and looked at her father. "Do I make a wish?" she asked. "If you want." She thought about it with great seriousness, closed her eyes, opened them, let go. The lantern rose not fast gently like it had its own opinion about the pace, and she watched it go with her arms still slightly up the shape of holding still in her hands after the thing she'd been holding was already gone. Daniel watched her. He didn't watch his own lantern. He hadn't made one. He'd been working. But he watched his daughters rise and join the others that were climbing slowly in the dark above the meadow. 43 small lights ascending in a loose constellation that had never existed before tonight, and would never exist again in exactly this way. Rosie lowered her arms. She reached up and took his hand. He held it. Lila found him after at the edge of the meadow when the families had begun the slow drift back toward the festival grounds, and the sky was just stars again, and the night had settled into the particular quiet that follows something true. She stood beside him. Not close. The right distance, the distance of someone who understood that he needed perimeter and was choosing to be inside it anyway. "Greg wants to talk tomorrow," she said. "About the program. About making it permanent. A real partnership with the festival, not Apex, not a sponsorship structure. Something built into the foundation." She paused. "He said, and I'm quoting, that this weekend demonstrated what the festival is actually for." Greg's a reasonable man. He is. She looked at the sky where the lanterns had been. Donovan pulled his formal complaint this afternoon, filed a withdrawal with the coordinator's office. Daniel nodded. He'd expected it. After the conversation at the prep table, he'd expected it. "He's not a bad person," she said quietly. "He just forgot what he was for." "That happens." "Does it happen to you?" He thought about it. The honest kind of thinking, not the quick kind. "I forgot what I was for a long time," he said. "After I got out. After the marriage." He paused. "I knew what I was doing, the routine, the schedule, the structure, but I couldn't tell you what it was for. Just forward. Keep moving. Don't stop." She was quiet beside him. "And now," she said. He looked at Rosie, who was 20 feet away, explaining to Walt's friend why Captain had needed to attend the lantern walk for emotional support. Walt's friend was nodding with complete seriousness. Walt was smiling. "Now I think I'm remembering," Daniel said. Lila looked at him. In the dark and the starlight and the end of this particular week, her expression was open in a way he didn't think she showed many people. The same thing he'd seen through the gap in the falling canvas on the first morning, that unguarded moment, the one she covered quickly, and he'd been thinking about ever since. She wasn't covering it now. "I'm going to be in Milwaukee for the winter," she said. "Running a clinic series out of the community center in River West. 12 weeks Tuesday and Thursday evenings." A pause. It's a 40-minute drive from here. He looked at her. I know where Milwaukee is. I know you do. A small pause. Rosie might like the junior sessions. They run Saturday mornings. She has school on Saturdays. Saturdays are not school days, Daniel. He almost said something. Didn't. Saturday mornings, he said. 9 o'clock. She held his gaze. You could bring coffee. I take it black. I know how you take it. I know you know. The corner of her mouth moved. I just wanted to hear you say it. He looked at her for a long moment. In the full quiet with the meadow behind them and the festival lights soft in the distance, and his daughter's voice carrying on the night air, and everything that had happened in the 4 days that had rearranged things inside him that he hadn't known were still capable of being rearranged. 9 o'clock, he said. She nodded, once. The way he nodded like a decision that was already made before the words arrived. She looked at Rosie, at Walt, at the meadow one more time. Thank you, she said quietly, for the space. He understood that she didn't only mean the staging area. She didn't only mean the East Trail or the North Meadow or the South Cutoff or any of the physical ground he'd walked and cleared and flagged over the last 4 days. She meant all of it. The way he'd moved into her chaos without asking her to become something else. The way he'd held the structure so she could hold the people. Thank you for the coffee, he said. She laughed, the real one, the full one, head back, and the sound of it moved across the meadow and into the dark, and he held on to it the way Rosie had held the shape of the lantern after it was already gone. 2. Carol came at 9:20 with the patient expression of a woman who had not been surprised by anything her brother did in 25 years and was not about to start now. She collected Rosie, collected Captain, exchanged a look with Daniel that lasted approximately 3 seconds, and communicated a complete paragraph and walked back to her car. Daniel stood at the edge of the festival grounds alone. The lanterns were gone. The meadow was quiet. The families were drifting toward their campsites and cars, carrying the small, tired satisfaction of people who had done something real with their bodies and their hands and their attention, and who would remember it differently than they remembered things they'd only watched. He looked at his watch. 9:23 p.m. He looked at the grounds. His grounds this week. The property he knew better than anyone currently standing on it. The drainage at Post 7. The soft zones on the north curve. The south cutoff with his flag still in the ground glowing faintly in the dark where the path lights caught them. He'd built something this week. Not the route. Not the flags. Not even the program he'd protected piece by piece against a man with a briefcase and a strategy. Something harder to name. Something that had to do with showing up to someone's collapsing tent at 6 in the morning and not walking away. With sharing his space when he'd spent 8 years building walls instead of doors. With watching his daughter hold a lantern like it was the most important thing she'd ever been trusted with, and understanding fully, finally in a way that landed in his bones, that the mission was never the thing he'd thought it was. The mission was this. The ordinary and the irreplaceable. The coffee before 9. The space between people who are still learning to trust what they feel. The flags in the dark so nobody loses the path. Daniel Reeves, who had once navigated by survival alone, picked up his grounds kit, took one last look at the meadow where 43 lanterns had risen and disappeared into something larger than any of them, and walked back through the festival toward the morning that was already quietly beginning to come. He had a Saturday to prepare for. He wasn't going to be late.